The national sales manager walked across the floor toward my desk. The entire sales floor went quiet. 200 people had been waiting for this moment, some of them for weeks. He stopped in front of me, reached into his jacket, and held out an envelope. My bonus check, the money I had earned, the money they had tried to keep. I stood up, looked him in the eye, took the envelope, and said thank you. Then I handed him my resignation letter. The look on his face, I will never forget it. It was the look of a man who had just realized he had lost the war while trying to win a negotiation. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His jaw tightened. He looked down at the letter, then back up at me, as if he was waiting for me to say I was joking. I was not joking, but to understand why that moment felt like the cleanest breath of air I'd ever taken, we need to go back to the spring of that year, to a company-wide meeting, a CEO on a stage, and a room full of people who had no idea they were about to get played. It was the year 2000. I was a salesman at a large financial services firm, 1,800 employees, 200 of us on the sales floor. It was the kind of company that had a reputation, 30-plus years in the business, known across the industry for paying well, treating people fairly, and keeping its word. When you told someone where you worked, they nodded with respect. That reputation was the reason most of us were there. I had been with the company long enough to know how the bonus system worked, and I want to be clear about this because it matters a lot. This was not some vague, discretionary bonus that management could hand out or withhold based on mood. The bonuses were formula-based, written down, black and white. You sell a certain amount, you get a certain amount. Every tier was spelled out. Every salesperson on the floor had a copy of the formula. If you hit your number, you got paid. It was not a gift. It was compensation. It was money we had already earned by doing exactly what the company asked us to do. In the previous 12 months, we had done extremely well. April came around, and the company held its annual meeting. The kind of event where they rent a big room. Everyone puts on their best clothes, and the CEO gets up on a stage and tells you how wonderful everything is. I remember sitting in that room, thinking that this was going to be a good year. The CEO was practically glowing. He talked about record-breaking numbers, about the best year in the company's 30-year history, about growth and momentum and the future being bright. The room was energized. People were clapping. You could feel it. That particular kind of optimism that comes when a team has genuinely performed and knows a reward is coming. We went back to our desks feeling good. In May, we each submitted memos, essentially written justifications for our bonuses. I spent time on mine. I laid out my sales growth territory by territory, month by month. I showed what percentage of total company sales had come from my accounts. I showed the trajectory. It was not a complicated argument to make. The numbers spoke for themselves. Coming off the company's best year ever, with a formula that clearly said what we were owed, it felt like a formality. A box to check before the check arrived. June came. My bonus was zero. Not reduced. Not delayed with a clear explanation. Zero. It was not just me. Within hours of the bonus deposits, or rather, the absence of them, the sales floor transformed into something I had never seen before. People who were normally composed, professional, customer-facing, suddenly looked like they had been punched. Phone calls went unanswered. Keyboards sat untouched. People gathered in clusters, speaking in low, furious voices. Less than 20% of the sales force had received anything. The rest of us, more than 160 people, had been handed nothing. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. There was a moment early in the year when one of the senior supervisors made a comment at a team meeting that I brushed off at the time. He said something like, "Of course, final compensation decisions are always at management's discretion." I remember thinking it was just standard corporate language, the kind of thing people say without meaning anything. I filed it away and forgot about it. I wish I hadn't, because that one sentence was the tell. Management had been quietly building themselves an exit ramp for months, and none of us had noticed. The anger that week was unlike anything I had seen in a professional setting. Supervisors were getting confronted at their desks. Emails were flying. Not careful, measured emails, but raw, accusatory ones. People were not performing. Sales stopped. The company was, in every meaningful sense of the word, facing a mutiny. And then something came out that made everything worse. The supervisors, our direct managers, had been offered bonuses. Not formula-based ones, discretionary ones that they could set themselves. Most of them took the money. A couple, knowing full well their teams were getting nothing, refused theirs on principle. But my supervisor was not one of those people. He took his bonus, and when it came out, and it always comes out, he tried to explain himself to us. He stood in front of his team and said he felt his bonus was justified, that he had worked hard, that he deserved it. I will give him credit for one thing. It takes a certain kind of nerve to say that to a room full of people who worked just as hard and got nothing. He did not get applause. He got people screaming at him, and I do not use that word loosely. Now, I need to tell you about a colleague of mine, a guy named Marcus, who had been on the floor about 2 years longer than me. Marcus was the kind of person who always had his finger on the pulse of what was really happening. Not a gossip, just observant. While the rest of us were venting our frustration in real time, Marcus was doing something different. He was quietly documenting everything, saving emails, writing down dates and times of conversations, taking note of which supervisors took bonuses and which refused. He pulled me aside on day 2 of the chaos and said, "Whatever you decide to do, make sure you have your paperwork in order. Keep your copy of the bonus formula. Keep every email. The company is going to try to make this disappear, and you want to be standing on solid ground when they do." That advice turned out to be worth more than the bonus itself. By day 3, I had made a decision. I was not going to rage and send furious emails and then quietly go back to work like nothing happened. That is what companies count on. They count on your anger burning hot for a few days and then cooling off and then being replaced by the creeping fear that you need the paycheck more than you need the principal. They count on most people eventually calculating that the cost of resistance is too high and backing down. I was not going to back down. I came in, sat at my desk, and opened up the job listings. Not discreetly, openly on my work computer on the main screen. I was not answering my phone. I was not making calls. I was not selling. When my supervisor came over and asked what I was doing, I told him plainly, I would resume working when I received the bonus my sales numbers had already earned. Until that happened, he could expect me to arrive late, search for other jobs during business hours, and leave early. I told him he could fire me if he wanted to. His choice. The next morning, I was called into the regional sales manager's office. She was a polished woman, the kind of professional who has a well-rehearsed toolkit for managing difficult conversations. She started warm, almost friendly, like we were just having a chat. Then she shifted to serious. Then she tried firm. I watched her cycle through the approaches like she was flipping through index cards. Throughout all of it, I stayed calm. I told her that if my supervisor had already briefed her on the situation, then she already knew why I had stopped working. I did not need to repeat myself. Then I did something I had prepared for the night before. I took out a piece of paper and I walked her through the math. My average daily sales from the previous 12 months. The total revenue the company was losing for every day I was not selling. The exact dollar amount that my bonus represented. And a straightforward comparison between those two numbers. Paying me what I was owed was significantly cheaper than continuing to lose my daily sales output. This was not emotional. This was arithmetic. I thanked her for her time, told her I would be leaving the building as soon as I stepped out of her office, and then I did exactly that. The next morning I came in, checked my emails, several of which were farewell messages from coworkers who had already resigned, and went back to the job listings. Around mid-morning, I was called to the office of the national sales manager. This was the top of the sales hierarchy, the man responsible for all 200 of us. He was measured, professional, and clearly uncomfortable. He told me he understood why I was upset. He said he could see my point of view. I looked at him and asked a direct question. Was the decision to withhold bonuses from 80% of the sales force's idea, or did it come from above him? He did not answer that. What he did say was that I would be receiving a check on Monday. He asked if I could please go back to work. I told him I would go back to my desk, but work would not resume until the check was physically in my hand. Not in the mail. Not processed. In my hand. I walked back to my desk. More farewell emails waiting in my inbox. More people leaving. The floor was getting quieter by the day. The next morning, an email went out to the entire sales force. Management had reviewed the numbers. They had reevaluated the financials. June bonuses would be issued shortly. The email apologized for the delay. It reminded us that the sales team was the core of the company and that our hard work was deeply appreciated. I read it twice. Then I saved it. Then I opened a new document and started drafting my resignation letter. Now, I want to explain something about where my head was at during those days, because I think it matters. I was not acting out of spite. I was not trying to burn the company down. I genuinely believed, and still believe, that every single person on that floor had a right to be angry and had a right to act on that anger. What the company did was not a misunderstanding. It was not a clerical error. It was a deliberate decision to withhold money that had already been earned under a written agreement. The fact that they called it a bonus was almost insulting. A bonus is something extra, something discretionary. What we had was a compensation formula. What they did was simply refuse to honor it and hope we would accept it. I was not going to accept it, but I also was not going to just take the check and go back to my seat like a good soldier. Because here's the thing about that kind of institution. If you let it happen once, you teach them that it works. You become a number, a unit of production that can be managed through fear and financial pressure. I had spent a year generating sales that contributed to the best year in the company's history, and they had responded by deciding my compensation was optional. I was done. Marcus came by my desk the evening before the check was supposed to arrive. He sat down, looked at me, and said, "You're not staying, are you?" I told him no. He nodded slowly. He said, "I figured. For what it's worth, what you did this week mattered. You made the move. They weren't going to pay anybody until you made it hurt." I appreciated that more than I said at the time. The next morning I came in. I sat down. I straightened my desk. I had my resignation letter in my jacket pocket already signed. I had calculated my unused vacation days and confirmed the number in writing via email to HR the previous afternoon, creating a paper trail for that as well, because I was not leaving any loose ends. The national sales manager appeared on the floor around 10 in the morning. He walked between the rows of desks. People watched him. He stopped at my desk, reached into his jacket, and handed me the envelope. I stood up. I took it. I opened it and confirmed the amount was correct. It was down to the last dollar, exactly what the formula said I had earned. I looked up at him and said thank you. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and handed him the envelope I had been carrying all morning. He took it. He looked at the front. He opened it. He read it. Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. The resignation was effective immediately. The letter also formally requested, in writing, that a check covering my full and used vacation balance be prepared and delivered to me before I left the building, as was my legal right. I had included the exact number of days and the calculated dollar amount, so there was no room for ambiguity or delay. He looked up from the letter. His expression had shifted. The professional composure was still there on the surface, but underneath, it was something that looked very much like panic, because he understood what he was holding. He was not just looking at one resignation. He was looking at what one resignation meant on a floor that was already bleeding people. He asked me if there was anything he could do to change my mind. I told him there was not. I went back to my desk and started emptying my drawers. A few minutes later, a coworker, a woman named Dana who had been with the company even longer than I had, and who had been one of the angriest people on the floor all week, walked over and said, "Is it true you just quit?" I told her yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Me too." She walked back to her desk, typed something, printed it, and walked over to the manager's assistant's desk and placed it in the tray. We were walked out together about 40 minutes later, after HR had processed our final checks, including every vacation day we were owed in cash as required. We crossed the street to the bar directly opposite the building and sat down and ordered drinks and did not say much for a while. We did not need to. Sometimes the right decision just has a particular quality of silence around it. In the weeks that followed, I heard from people who stayed. The company had issued all the bonuses. The email, the apologies, the reminder that the sales force was the core of the company. It had all been real. The checks had gone out, but the damage was done. Over the next 2 months, the company lost roughly 20% of its sales force. Not just the people who were most angry, some of the best performers, the ones who had options, the ones who could pick up the phone and have another job by Friday. The very people that the CEO had stood on a stage and celebrated 4 months earlier were now walking out the door with their boxes and their dignity. I landed a new role within 3 weeks. Better base salary, cleaner commission structure, and a company where the compensation formula was honored because the leadership understood a simple truth that my former employer apparently needed to learn the hard way. When you build your revenue on the performance of salespeople, and then you decide their earned compensation is negotiable, you are not saving money. You're spending it. You're spending trust. You're spending loyalty. You're spending institutional knowledge. And those are the most expensive things a company can lose because you cannot put them back once they are gone. Marcus stayed for another 6 months before leaving on his own terms. He called me after he handed his notice and told me the floor still had not recovered. Not fully. The culture had shifted. The energy that had made the company's best year possible had evaporated, and no amount of bonus checks could bring it back. The CEO who stood on that stage and talked about the best year in the company's history had probably not thought about what made that year possible. He thought about the numbers. He did not think about the people who produced them. That is ultimately the most common and most costly mistake in business. You can see the output without respecting the people behind it, right up until the moment the people leave and the output goes with them. I do not tell this story with bitterness. I am genuinely grateful for what happened because it clarified something for me that I might have taken years longer to understand. The moment a company decides that your earned compensation is something they can decide to give or withhold based on their own convenience, you are no longer an employee. You are an asset they are managing. And assets do not get to choose their own terms. People do. It chose me now. So here's where I leave it with you. I got my check. I got my vacation payout. I walked out with my integrity completely intact. The company lost me, lost Dana, and lost roughly 40 other people in the months that followed. People who had driven the best year in company history and were never coming back. Was I too harsh? Should I have taken the check, smiled, and quietly kept my head down? Should I have been grateful that they eventually paid what they owed and moved on like a good company man? The call came midweek, 3 days into my work stoppage, and I almost did not pick up. It was my supervisor, not a message through his assistant, not an email, but his actual voice on my direct line, which told me something had shifted. I let it ring twice before answering. He got to the point quickly, which I respected, even then. He said he needed me to understand the position I was putting the team in, that my numbers were affecting everyone's visibility, not just mine, that there were people on the floor who depended on collective performance metrics, and my decision to stop selling was, in his words, holding them hostage to your personal grievance. My hands went still on the desk. Personal grievance. That was the phrase he chose. Not earned compensation. Not a written formula. Not a contractual obligation the company had quietly decided to ignore. Personal grievance. As if I were a child sulking over a slight, rather than a professional who had spent 12 months generating revenue for a company that had now decided my pay was optional. He kept going. He said he understood I was frustrated. He said everyone was frustrated, but that there was a way to handle these things professionally through the proper channels by filing a formal inquiry with HR, and that what I was doing instead was, and I remember this clearly, not a good look for someone who wants to be taken seriously around here. Something dropped in my chest. Not anger, something quieter and colder than anger. The particular sensation of watching someone reveal, without meaning to, exactly what they think of you. I told them I would keep that in mind. Then I hung up and went back to the job listings. It was Marcus who found me that evening, just before I left. He came around the partition and sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited, which was how Marcus operated. He read the room, and then he moved through it on his own terms. I had always liked that about him. He asked how I was holding up. I told him fine, which was mostly true. He nodded like he did not entirely believe me, which was fair. And he said he had found something. He said it carefully, the way people say things when they know the information they're carrying has weight. He had been going back through old company filings. Not the kind of thing most people on a sales floor spend their evenings doing, but Marcus had been suspicious for longer than the rest of us. He said he had found a quarterly earnings summary from the previous year, the one that corresponded to the period the CEO had celebrated at the April meeting. The record-breaking year, the best in company history. The summary included a line item in the compensation projections. It accounted for full bonus payouts across the sales force. Every tier, every formula, the money had been budgeted. It existed. They had projected it as an anticipated expense, recorded it as such in the financials, and then quietly decided not to pay it. This was not a company that had hit an unexpected shortfall. This was not a company that had run the numbers and discovered, to its genuine regret, that bonuses could not be sustained. This was a company that had looked at a line item they were fully prepared to honor and made a deliberate choice to keep it. I sat with that for a moment. Marcus said, they knew exactly what they were doing, start to finish. The April meeting, the CEO's speech, the memos they had us write in May, all of it was cover. They were building a paper trail that made it look like they had engaged with us in good faith, right up until the moment they didn't. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with clarity. Because what Marcus had just told me changed the shape of the thing. This was not mismanagement. This was not a bad decision made under financial pressure. This was a coordinated, premeditated decision to take money that had already been earned, that had already been budgeted, and simply not pay it, and then to manage the fallout by cycling through warmth and sternness and corporate language about proper channels and personal grievances. I thought about the resignation letter sitting in my jacket pocket. I thought about the check that was supposedly coming Monday. I told Marcus what I was planning to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good. That night, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before driving home. I was not crying. I was not shaking. I was just sitting with it. The full weight of the week, the full shape of the decision I had already made, the particular silence of a person who has run out of reasons to wait. I thought about the April meeting, the applause, the way the room had felt. I thought about the memo I had written in May, the care I had put into it, the hours I'd spent pulling together 12 months of territory data, laying it out clearly, making the case the formula had already made for me. The sincerity of it, the fact that I had believed, genuinely believed, that it was a formality. I thought about my supervisor's voice on the phone. Personal grievance. 30 years. The company had been in business for 30 years and had built a reputation on keeping its word. That reputation was the reason I had taken a job. The reason 200 of us were there. We had trusted it. They had known that. They had counted on it. They had counted on the fact that people who trust an institution are slower to leave it, slower to fight it, more likely to absorb a betrayal and rationalize it as an anomaly rather than a pattern. I was done rationalizing. I thought about Dana, 3 rows over, who had been with the company longer than almost anyone on the floor and who had gone very quiet since the bonuses had not come. The quiet of someone doing the same math I was doing. I thought about the farewell emails, colleagues I had known for years gone. I thought about Marcus's voice saying they knew exactly what they were doing. Short sentences lived in my head then. Not arguments, just facts. I earned this. They knew. They decided it didn't matter. And now they wanted to go back to my desk. I looked at the dashboard clock. I thought about the check coming Monday. I thought about what it would mean to take it and stay, what I would be telling them, and more importantly, what I would be telling myself. That the line was somewhere else, that I would find it later, that this was survivable in a way that left something important intact. I knew that was not true. The money was never really the point or rather it was the point, but it was not the whole point. The point was what the money represented. The point was a written formula and a 30-year reputation and a room full of people clapping for a CEO who was standing on their work and had already decided their compensation was a line item he could quietly erase. The point was personal grievance, set in a tone designed to make me feel small. The point was that I'd spent a year doing exactly what I was asked, and it had not been enough to earn basic honesty. And if it was not enough this time, it would never be enough. Because the problem was not my performance. The problem was that they had decided performance was not the variable that mattered. I was the variable, my willingness to accept it. That was what they were managing. I started the car. Tomorrow the check would come. Tomorrow I would stand up and take the envelope and confirm the number and say thank you. And then I would hand them mine. I drove home in the quiet. I slept better than I had all week. The lesson I took from all of it is this. People who count on your silence to protect their lies are always shocked when you stop being silent. Was I wrong to do what I did? Or did they get exactly what they earned? Let me know in the comments. Or did they get exactly what they asked for? I know what I think, but I want to know what you think. Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely believe the answer says a lot about where you are in your own working life. And if you have ever been in a room where someone handed you less than you earned and expected you to say thank you, this one was for you.